Now that I have the sump removed, I can remove the crankshaft timing belt, the vibration damper pulley, and the crankshaft gear, which is at the back. With that off and the timing belt off, I can then remove the oil pump, which sits at the back over there. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it is clearly leaking. You cannot get the oil pump off without removing the sump, and you can't get the sump off without rotating the flywheel to expose the gap in the flywheel to release the two hidden flywheel bolts. But to remove the sump, you've also got to remove the drive shaft and trumpet from the back of the engine. To remove the oil pump, you need to disconnect it from the oil pickup pipe underneath there. That is the oil pickup pipe where it joins onto the bottom of the oil pump. So I just need to remove those two bolts, or remove that bolt over there and that bolt over there. Then the oil pickup pipe will move with the oil pump when I shift away from the block, because the gasket sits between the two over there. Removing the two 10mm bolts from the oil pickup pipe, which mounts it to the block. Remove all the scubbins off the side of the engine so I can get the oil pump off. Now that the oil pump is loose, I can just slide it off. There you go. And that's the old gasket. And you can see in the corners there, definitely been leaking, as I suspected. Well, that is the oil pump gasket removed. Now you can actually see that it is broken over there, so that would have been contributing to some of the oil leak. This is the pack of L-ring oil pump gaskets. That is the old gasket with the little tear in it over there, and you can see how mucky it is down in these corners where it was leaking out. So this is my new pack of L-rings. That is the part number over there. Now interestingly, these replacement ones are a different material to the original, well, the one that was on there. I wouldn't know if this was original or not. This seems kind of like a paperish gasket, and these seem to be a little bit better in that they seem to be metallic. The only difference that I can see here is that the original has this round hole here, whereas the replacement doesn't. Let me go and check the van to make 100% sure that I don't need a hole there. I need to check if I need that hole in the gasket, because the replacements do not have that hole. So interestingly, at the top of the block here where the oil pump mounts, there's these two little holes. They are not threaded. There's the little screw hole over there, and there's another screw hole over there, and there's different screw holes around it there, and the pins for locating the pump and the gasket. But it doesn't appear as if I need to have this hole. You can see the shape of the original gasket there. So let's see how this new gasket fits. Those are the two locating pins over there. Pop that on. I want to make sure that each of the screw holes is accessible. Right, so that is where it's blanked off, so it doesn't look to be a problem. I just need to make sure that the back of the oil pump doesn't have something that needs to go into that hole up there. Okay, so the back side of the oil pump is flat. It doesn't have any pins in it, so that new oil pump seal should be perfect. I've cleaned the surface of the engine block where the oil pump mounts to. I used a bit of brake cleaner, and I'll also use some very fine sandpaper just to make sure that I get all the grit off there. But before I put the pump back, I need to replace the seal that goes around the crankshaft over here. This looks like a full bottom end sealing kit, which I wasn't expecting. I was just expecting the sump gasket. What I did have is this seal here is the correct seal for the oil pump crankshaft seal. Let's check if this seal that came in that L-ring sump kit fits the oil pump. So that is the oil pump there. Ooh! Yes, please. Great stuff. So that fits in there. Let's check if this fits on the crank. That there is the crankshaft. This is that seal. Perfecto. Okay. I'm not going to force that on just yet, but it's definitely that seal. Happy days. This is the back of the oil pump, and you can see that there is the remnants of an old gasket there, which couldn't have helped in sealing this. You can see where it's all grubby around the edge of the oil pump. This is the bottom side with the oil pickup. This here is just indicative of all of the leaking that was going on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to tidy this all up now before I refit it with the new gasket. That is the oil seal out with a little bit of encouragement. So I smacked it out from the back end over there. There is apparently a VW tool to do just that job, but a rubber mallet and a big screwdriver did it for me. And I did notice that on the back of the oil pump over here, where the locating pins go to hold the oil pump in place, both of them had slight burrs on the edge there, and what I've done now is just sand them down a little bit, because obviously any kind of burr will stop the gasket from sealing correctly, which is probably what the problem was before. This is where the oil pickup tube mounts to, and although I have a gasket for that, the actual oil pickup has an O-ring. So I'm going to check that L-ring kit and see if there's an O-ring for that. Otherwise I'll have a rummage through my bits. I've got a box of O-rings, so I'll find one that fits and then replace that. This is the little paper gasket that came in that kit. You can see it's a perfect fit. I've got my oil pump on the workbench, and I want to open it up so that I can clean out the inside of the mechanicals here. When I rotate it, you can hear that there's a little bit of grunge in there, so I'm just going to do some preventative maintenance, open this up and give it a thorough clean. Now these screws that are in here are in pretty tight, so I have purchased an impact screwdriver, and what happens with this is that you can set it to either rotate clockwise or anti-clockwise. You put in your correct bit on the end, and then you insert it into the screw head like that, and you whack it with a hammer. Not too hard, but just enough, and what it does is it loosens the screw. there's a little kind of cutout in the corner there. Take the plate off, and that is what it looks like inside the oil pump. So there's these two little gears here that rotate. Such a simple thing. Let's inspect those teeth. Make sure that none of them are damaged. Operation is lovely and smooth. But you can hear that there's a bit of grit in here. Right, so let's take the gears out and give them a clean. Now, to remove these two gears, I'm just going to use some picks. Just slide that out, like that. There we go. This is the top side where it has the 4 recesses. It has a little bit of an indentation there. The large gear also has a little indentation over there. So that would be top side where the indentations are. Make sure there's no grit in here that might get into my oil passages, and then clean it with some parts cleaner. Make sure I don't leave any residue from this paper behind. Pretty happy with that. That's come out very, very nice indeed. You can see this is a little bit mangled here, so we need to tidy that up before I put the oil pressure thingy-majig back in to the whatchamacallit. Much better. So now I know that when this oil pressure sensor is screwed back in here, it will mount nicely against this face. Let's put this back together. So for that, it's recommended to use some assembly lube. I just got this off Amazon. Just gonna put this on here and then on these surfaces. Let's clean the gears. There my little mark is on the top. Beautiful. Right, I'm going to put that mark at 6 o'clock. Grab my other gear, give it a clean. There's the little mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get those two marks nearly lined up. They don't line up perfectly, they're just slightly offset. Oh yeah, that's good. Fix a skateboard, fix a bike, fix a car, fix a VW T4 Transporter. There you go. And when I put the screws back in, I'm going to use some Loctite thread locker just on those screws, and then tighten it all up again. And there we have it. The oil pump cleaned out, lubed, and put back together again. Ready to go back onto the van. This is the new crankshaft oil seal for the oil pump. So the oil pump has got a little bit of assembly lube in there, and what I'm going to do is just add a smidge more to the outside of the seal, and then I'm going to use a large socket, which is a 35mm socket, to press this in to the oil pump over there, and then that has got to go in there. Ooh. Press that in like that. just to make sure that I don't damage that. Pop that in there. There we go. That's it. Oil seal done. Because it's easier to do so, it seems, I'm going to fit my new water pump in place before I refit the oil pump. So I don't think this needs any sealant. There's no mention of it in the manual, and there wasn't any sealant on the back of the original water pump that I removed from here. So I'm just going to put this back in place and then torque this down to the correct settings. That is the oil pump over there, and then the pressure switch. So what I'm going to do is give this a little bit of a light coating of assembly lube, just to make sure that it slides in there nicely. This washer goes onto that bolt with the thread, and that goes like that. So I'm just going to insert that in there like this, and then what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of Loctite thread sealant on there. So I'm just going to use a little pick to help guide this into place. There we go, like so. I've got out my little torque wrench, and this one thankfully has both Newton meters and kilograms per meter. So I've set it to 4 kilograms over there, which is also 30 foot-pounds according to the manual. This is a 22mm socket, like so, and that is it. Time now to fit the oil pump back on the engine. Before I do that, I want to apply a little bit of this VW sealing paste to this machined face here to seal some of these little indentations that are evident in the surface. So I'm going to put a little bit of sealing paste on this surface. This gasket will then fit over the top of it, and then with that in place, the sealing paste will kind of hold it in place a little bit securely while I move it from the workbench to the engine block. But before I put it on the engine block, I'm going to put a thin bead of sealing paste around here in this little recess that's in the gasket. So this is a metal gasket. I've been advised to use the metal gasket as opposed to the paper gasket. So this sealing paste is like a grey color. I've got a very little hole in there, so I can apply a very thin bead of this stuff. It kind of smells a lot like silicone. It probably is a kind of silicone. I thought it would be a good idea to practice the sequence of bolts that get added to the oil pump and the covers before I start assembling it on the engine block. You don't bolt the oil pump down in one go. There are bolts that get added. So it starts with 3 bolts. The 2 short ones with these washers and a longer one also with the washer. The longer one goes over there, the 2 shorter ones go over there. And this is how the oil pump is mounted to the block with the gasket behind it. Additionally, from the sump side, there are 4 M5 bolts, 5mm Allen sockets that get bolted in over there. And that is how the oil pump gets mounted to the block. Once that's in place, you then add this shield, and this one fits like that. So it's got 2 bolts over there, one over there, and one over here. This one is this long bolt, and that gets bolted down into the block. You then have a 5mm Allen socket with the washer like that, and that gets bolted in that corner over there. This bolt over here is for the tensioner pulley. Then there are 2 additional 10mm bolts which go in like that. Then add the tensioner pulley. Now the tensioner pulley has got this little slotted hole in it, and that slotted hole needs to fit over the little prong on this metal case, which is over there. So this will go on like that, so it's in place over there, and then it gets tightened down. This is the tensioner indicator that then when you tighten this up to tension, this little pointer has to point down here. Over here is where the water pump is. At this point you could ordinarily fit the crankshaft gear and run your belt. The next step is to add this cover plate. Now this cover plate, I'm just going to remove that for the purposes of indicating what's going on, because that would be screwed down. This cover plate goes over the top, so it fits over that tensioner bolt there, and then it has 1, 2, 3 tabs that line up, and there are threaded captive nuts in this lower plate, and you use 3 short bolts, very short, these little ones. There are 3 of those that screw in at the top here. 1, 2, and 3. So make sure the threads on these are clean and the captive nuts are also clean. I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on each of these bolts into the block and into this, because obviously I need to be able to make sure that this doesn't come loose with the vibrations from the engine. And that is the sequence of how this all gets assembled. Hopefully that helps you put it back together again, because it's certainly going to help me put it back together again, that's for sure. So I've got my oil pump, and what you need to bear in mind is that this has got these recesses, this kind of toothed gear like a freewheel on a BMX, and it needs to line up with those teeth at the back, so these will position themselves. So I've got to kind of guess where they are, and then get it to fit, because if it doesn't fit it will not screw down. So I'm going to have to keep shifting that around until those 4 recesses and prongs, as it were, until that little gear, that 4-tooth gear, kind of locks into place, because that's what obviously drives the pump. So I've managed to position the oil pump now so that those teeth line up. Roughly they're running at that sort of angle over there at about 1 to 7, like that. And you've got to line up the gear on the back of the oil pump with the crankshaft, and then this will seat quite nicely, and then I can screw it in. Now I need to torque these up to 2 kilograms per meter. There we go. And there it is, finally. And I'm going to leave that to settle and then fit the steel plate. Now the next step is I will drop the sump off again, because it's only held on by a couple of bolts to keep the engine clean underneath. I will attach the pickup pipe to the bottom of the oil pump. The next piece to be fitted onto the oil pump is the lower shroud. So this is the one that fits directly onto the oil pump and also helps hold the oil pump in place with these 4 screws, these 4 bolts. One of them is that really long one. One of them is an Allen head or a hex socket, sunken hex socket, and then you've got these 2 10mm hex M6s as well. So I'm going to fit that now. Next I'm going to mount the tensioner pulley, and then I'm going to slide my crankshaft gear pulley with the balancer attached and the belt in as well. That is all in place now. I have the damper bolts in, the crank bolt, the new crank bolt, brand new stretch bolt. I've tightened up the water pump again. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative. Give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you a thing, and of course it's a great encouragement to me.